today. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and start this week's Wednesday webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I'm Shannon Dill. I'm with the University of Maryland Extension Program with Women in Agriculture, and happy to host these webinars twice a month, the second and fourth Wednesday. We'd like to thank our sponsors as well as collaborators on these webinars. And you can see today we'll be talking about farm transition taxes and Medicaid for estate recovery. We do have some coming up through the end of 2018. August will be credit and credit scores as well as resource stewardship evaluation tool. All of the webinars are recorded and posted here on this blue link, extension.umd.edu, Women in Ag. At this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Kelly Nuckolls, and she'll be talking about kind of a tough subject here, Kelly. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. So today I'm going to talk about two issues that are kind of significant to farm estates, especially because of the amount of money that an estate could lose due to these two specific topics. First, I'm with the Agricultural Law Education Initiative, and we have a number of estate planning resources as well as other legal topics resources available on our website, so I highly recommend checking that out. But today I'll only be able to give a quick overview, but we have resources on our website that discuss these topics in more detail. Just a quick disclaimer too, this information is just for educational purposes. It is not legal advice. So if you have really specific questions about how these two issues might impact your farm transition plan, you should consult an attorney who can help you with your specific issue or problem. And I'll also mention that state laws are different. So I'm going to focus mostly on Maryland law today and a little bit of Delaware law, but some of these issues have a little bit of differences depending upon what state you are in. So today I'm going to talk about two big bills, and I like to call them bills, that your state may have to pay. So two things that could be charged to your state after your death. And this includes estate and death taxes, and then Medicaid recovery for some long-term health care costs that might arise as you age. Specifically with the estate and death taxes, this was an issue that a lot of farm families and farm operations were concerned about up until last year when the tax reform bill passed. So originally I was going to just focus on this big issue, but things have changed, and luckily farm families probably will not have to deal with, at least at the federal level, the estate tax. So with that change for 2018, your estate tax exemption amount is $11.2 million. If you're married, it would double to $22.4 million. So you have to go over that amount. Your estate's worth would have to be over that amount to actually be charged an estate tax at the federal government level. So most farm operations probably will not fall under that. If you're worried that you may come close to falling under those amounts, keep in mind that your estate's worth will be the fair market value of all of the property you owned at death minus all of the liabilities and allowable deductions. And there are a number of things that the federal law allows you to deduct. So if you're concerned, it might be a really great opportunity to go in and discuss with your accountant exactly what the actual worth of your estate might be, because it may not be as close as you think it is. With states, there are fewer and fewer states that are actually having an estate tax now. Last year, Delaware repealed theirs, so for 2018, there is no estate tax in there. Maryland's law recently changed this year as well. For 2018, the exemption amount is $4 million, so lower than the federal level and may impact a few farms here in the state of Maryland. And then for 2019 and beyond, for years after, it will be set at the $5 million amount. But it is important to keep in mind, starting in 2019, you will be able to have what's called spousal portability. That's where you can double your estate's worth and use your spouse's unused amount. So if you're married, it would actually be $10 million starting in 2019 for your estate. So that's something to keep in mind. It's also important to keep in mind that Maryland does have a special farm property valuation up to a $5 million reduction in your estate's worth, and this can significantly reduce your estate as well. So there are several requirements to have your farm property, so your land, valued at this reduction rate, but as long as you meet those specific requirements, you will be able to reduce your estate by up to $5 million. Maryland also has an inheritance tax, and this can be fairly significant as well to your estate. This does not apply to, however, anyone's grandparents, parents, children, spouses, children's spouses, grandchildren, several different types of relatives. So the main concern that you will have if you're worried about the inheritance tax will be if you are going to plan on transitioning the farm onto either an aunt or uncle or niece or nephew, or maybe even a friend or someone who's worked on your farm for a while. So if that is who you think will take over the farm and you're planning on gifting it to them, mind the inheritance tax is pretty high. It's 10% of the clear value of the property, which is the fair market value minus any of those allowable expenses. And that's regardless of how much your estate's worth. So that 10% could be a pretty significant chunk of your estate. Luckily, you will be able to use that special valuation for farmland to reduce your estate amount, so that part may not be high rate. And then also, there is a new law that passed in Maryland that can also exempt certain people from the inheritance tax if the property has been placed in a perpetual conservation easement. So that might be one tool to help you avoid this high tax. If you're worried about any of these types of estate taxes, it's important to realize there may be some tools that can help protect your estate, and these are just a few that you may want to discuss with an attorney. You could, of course, give away under the annual gift tax exclusion amount over a period of time your property. The annual gift tax exclusion amount is $15,000 if you're single, $30,000 if you're married, to each person that you give it to each year. So if you have 2 children, you could each $30,000 a year if you're married, and that won't count against your total estate tax exclusion amount. So that could be a good way to slowly reduce your estate's worth over time, but still maintain control over your property. There are also some different types of trusts that may be able to protect your estate from these taxes, specifically an irrevocable trust, which will transfer the title of all that property so you will no longer own it. The downside of this is you will not be able to get that property back or access it later on if you need it. It's completely given to the trust at that point. There are also some life insurance policies that actually help to pay off estate taxes. So if this is something you're concerned about, it might be a good idea to go talk to an insurance agent about what policies are available and what might work best for your farm operation. And then, of course, you could always sell your property over time as well. That may not reduce your estate's worth, but at least the farm operation would have been given to the person that you wanted to give it to by that point. So you could do that through several different ways, including installment sales, where you sell the farmland over a period of time to the next generation, and then you only pay the income tax on that amount that was paid each year overall. The other big estate issue that could cost your estate is long-term health care. And I think this is one that's becoming a bigger concern among farm families, especially after the estate tax change at the federal level. That may not be as big of an issue anymore, but long-term health care costs are still a pretty significant amount. And so it's important to realize that while you may or may not think that you will end up in a long-term healthcare facility, the statistics show that a large percent of Americans are ending up in long-term healthcare facilities and having extended stay in these facilities. How much could it cost? These are the averages for the state of Maryland right now. So you can see, depending on if you're in an assisted living facility or a nursing home, it can be a pretty significant amount. And it's important to note this as we talk about soon and a little bit here, the amount that could be taken from your estate later on. So as you can see, it could be a very large chunk of your estate, especially if you're in one of these facilities for over, a couple of years, especially if for a very long time. How will you pay for it? You have a couple of different options. You could pay out of pocket, but after seeing those numbers, that may not be feasible for most people. You could purchase long-term health care insurance. So this is something to start thinking about sooner rather than later, because annual premium costs are lower the younger that you are. But you can see these are the average estimates for the state of Maryland too, and it can be pretty significant each year, the amount that you might have to pay. So it's important to start thinking about these things as early as possible. The other option is to apply for and meet the eligibility requirements for government-funded programs that pay for these long-term healthcare costs, and I'm going to go into more detail about those next. So there are a couple of different options, but unfortunately, Medicare, which most people think will help pay for their healthcare costs once they're older, does not pay for most of a nursing home stay. It actually only pays towards the first 100 days, and it really only fully covers the first 20 days. And there are some requirements that you have to meet in order for Medicare to pay for the stay. So Medicare really, in the end, is not a good option to rely on to stay in a long-term healthcare facility. Medicaid, on the other hand, has several different programs, a couple of different programs in place to help pay for some of these long-term health care costs. And this is actually a little bit different from the normal Medicaid health insurance that people typically think of. There are different income requirements. They're usually higher. So a lot of people originally like to consider this option. There's, of course, the medical assistance, and this program will pay for the nursing home level of stay. And then there's also the elderly waiver program, which is more for an assisted living level of care. But if you do choose to use these two Medicaid programs, estate recovery could be a big issue for your estate later on. And the bills that program paid may come back onto your estate, and your estate will have to pay them. So what exactly is this estate recovery? This happens after your spouse, or if you have a disabled child or a minor child, after they are no longer, of course, of age, or after they pass on. Anything that's left in your estate will then pay for all the cost. So going back to those big numbers, you saw that if you're in a facility for a long time, it can be a very significant amount that your estate will have to pay. Also, with estate recovery, any real property, so that's your farmland and all of the buildings attached to it, this will be subject to a lien that will pay all of the remaining costs of the stay that you had in that Medicaid covered. There are some exceptions just for your personal residence, so your home, but that does farmland, all of your farm equipment and all of those assets. So while there are exceptions for personal home that are very specific. Of course, this may not save your farm operation in the end. With that estate reclaim, I'll talk about that a little more in detail. In Maryland, if you're part of this program and there's no reasonable expectation that you could be discharged from the facility, the government will put a lien against all of your real property. So again, that's your farm and any buildings that's attached to it. This might be a concern, especially for the next generation and for the current generation who's still operating this farm, because you may not be able to get access to another credit line because of that lien on your property. Other lenders may not be interested in lending to you with this lien on your property. They may still, but that's something to keep in mind. And sometimes it takes a while, even after death and after the estate's paid off, your Medicaid costs for this lien to actually be removed. So that's something to keep in mind as well for the next generation. Of course, there is another exception for your home. They won't put a lien on your home. If you meet this specific exception, again, that's just your home, that's not your farmland, and your farm buildings. So there are some legal tools that help protect your estate from this Medicaid recovery. Specifically, these tools are really great options to help protect your estate, but unfortunately you have to have these tools in place 5 years before you even apply for this Medicaid program, pay for your long-term health care costs. So I always, have this conversation with people that it might be really hard for you to predict when that 5-year period may be. So it's always important to start thinking about these things as early as possible. Specifically with these tools, of course, there is several legal tools, but a life estate deed is one option. With this, you have to do it 5 years before, but you could name yourself as a life tenant, so you are able to live on and use the property, but it will automatically transfer the property to your beneficiaries that you list upon your death. Of course, some negatives with this, you won't go back, which probably who those beneficiaries are, or to sell or give away the property to someone else later on, but you will still be able to use the property and still farm the property. And another downside to using this tool is that it is only for that real property again, so that would be just the land and any buildings attached to it. There's also, again, an irrevocable trust that you could use if you do it before the 5-year period. With this, you must retitle all of the property and give it to the trust. So again, it will no longer be your property, it will be the trust property. But with that, of course, when you create a trust, you can always write really specific instructions to explain exactly how you want that property to be used and transferred on to the next generations. It will just have to be a situation where you really think about what instructions you want to place with that trust, so you still have your wishes and what's best for the farm operation, the final outcome. You could also create a business entity with multiple owners and slowly gift or sell those shares on to the next generation. But again, this is something where you should really retitle the property and give it to the business entity, so you may no longer have complete control, but you could still give yourself some control and some shares in the business, so you still have a say in your farm operation. You could also sell or gift the property to the next generation, but again, you need to be doing this as soon as possible before that 5-year period. And then, of course, how your property is titled. There are certain ways to title your property, and specifically one way called joint tenancy automatically transfers your property on to a joint tenant that is a co-owner of that property. So, for example, you could list your child on the deed with you as a joint tenant, and this could help protect your estate from this estate recovery. If you don't use any of these legal tools or other legal tools to protect your estate before the 5-year period, there is a substantial hardship application that you can submit to the state, and they will consider whether or not they will recover the full amount or any amount at all from that long-term health care costs that they paid for. Just a quick wrap up. Specifically, just remember that if you don't plan and you don't think ahead, of course, no planning could result in questions and concerns about paying those long-term health care costs. Specifically, that state recovery of all those Medicaid costs can be very, very expensive, as you saw. And then, of course, if you're worried about either inheritance taxes based on who you're giving the property to or meeting that estate tax at the state or federal level, meeting that exemption amount, you should also discuss with an attorney because there are a lot of legal tools available that can help protect your estate and make sure that your farm is ready to be transferred on to the next generation. So it's important to talk to your attorney or a financial advisor or an accountant to help plan for the future. And specifically, if you're looking for more information and more detail about these topics, we are having some workshops related to this subject, and it will cover a bigger variety of estate planning and transition planning topics. So specifically, we have some workshops on transferring the farm onto the next generation coming up this year, and here are all the counties they're located in and the dates. So again, check our website for updates on specific locations. And then we're going to have some workshops that focus on investing in your farm's future. So some of these long-term healthcare discussions will be in more detail, as well as some retirement planning options that farm families may want to consider. So again, I recommend saving these dates if there's one in a county that you're located in. And then finally, just plug for our 4th annual Agricultural and Environmental Law Conference that will be on November 8th this year. We have a number of exciting legal topics that will be discussed, as you can see here. So there is more information at the link there. And you also are able to apply for a beginning farmer scholarship with Shannon if you email her about that. So I highly recommend checking out our website and learning more about our annual conference. And then this work and research has been based on a grant that was funded by USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture and the Northeast Extension Risk Management Education Center. And with that, my contact information is below, and I would be happy to take any questions that anyone has. Let me see if I can. Let's see if I can. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. I might give it a few more minutes, but thank you all again for attending, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.